Ladies, gentlemen, and emblems of all ages, back by popular demand is this tier list that I did a little video on of making the best Fire Emblem game. This time we're going to make the worst Fire Emblem game. Just like before, the rules are simple. I can only use each game once. I know in the comments a lot of you guys had modifications on how you wanted this done, and you were appealing to use some games more than once or less than once. You can feel free to do this however you want and share it in the comments. I'm still going to do it that way because I think that makes it fun and restrictive. So we're going to keep it that way. This time, I'm going to design the worst Fire Emblem game. Now, this is not a hate video. I was kind of on the fence on whether or not I wanted to do this because it's just going to seem like me bashing on every single game instead of praising it for what it does well. But it's all fun and games, and I'm going to try anyways. We're going to design the most atrocious game, at least in my opinion, and feel free, as usual, to tell me that I'm wrong. All right, so let's talk about the worst story. There's a couple of usual suspects when it comes to the worst stories in Fire Emblem. Now, it's really hard to pin down which one exactly I want to bring here. And I think there might end up being a shuffle based on what I think the worst element is of each one to really kind of lock that in. But to me, Shadow Dragon, the first few games are very simple. I can exclude basically everything between 4 and 10 as being generally pretty good story-wise. They're definitely not the worst. 11 and 12 are the same as 1 and 3. And Shadows of Valentia, oddly, is a little bit of like a quote-unquote enhancement on 2. So it's actually better than that. So I wouldn't put it in the worst category here. Awakening is meh, it's okay. Fates, I know, usually gets the most hate for being the worst story. And Engage is probably pretty far up there in terms of the story. I don't know if Engage does anything particularly bad. Its hub world might be pretty bad. But otherwise, I think it does pretty well, so I don't know. I might start... You know what? No. We're going to go with Fates for story, and because people were confused about me only putting one of the Fates games up there, I'm going to put all 3, because I think as a collective, the story's pretty bad. Fates. I don't think anyone's really going to debate that. So we'll put Fates in the worst in terms of story list here. In terms of characters, I think this is a no-brainer. I mean, Shadow Dragon and New Mystery basically have paper-thin characters. I think New Mystery of the Emblem actually tries a little bit with its characters, but I think the worst cast by far is the cast of Shadow Dragon. So I'm going to do that. They're terrible. They have no depth. It's pretty easy to call it that way. All right, let's think. The worst progression system. I feel like I gave the newer games a lot of props with their progression systems, but when I think about the worst progression systems, I mean the most vanilla progression system there is basically GBA Fire Emblem. And those, I would have to remove Sacred Stones from that because they actually do something pretty good. And I'll have to remove sort of the DS, 3DS era because New Mystery and Shadow Dragon actually did something with its progression system. So for this one, I would have to say it's either going to be Binding Blade, FE7, or some of the really old games. I think actually, ironically, Gaiden is actually okay in its progression system, but maybe the original, I don't know. I feel like it's kind of hard to cross over these ones with the remakes, because the remakes really did it better, but the old ones kind of stand the test of time. For now, I'm going to put Binding Blade in the worst progression system. Supports. Okay, the worst supports are New Mystery of the Emblem. And actually, oh no, wait, that's Awakening. That's not New Mystery. Hold on. New Mystery of the Emblem has terrible, terrible supports. I mean, it's just bad. And a lot of these games actually don't have supports, like the older ones, anything before the GBA era. But New Mystery of the Emblem tried with its supports, and they're pretty bad. Fate's supports are also kind of memed here, and Awakenings aren't great either. I feel like the GBA ones, this is hard. Picking the worst supports. I mean, honestly, I'll put Engage here. Engage has pretty bad supports. At least in my opinion. I didn't think all of the supports were really good. But I didn't also explore the supports in Engage very, very deeply. Ooh, map design. We actually have a few contenders for the worst map design, but I think by far and away, the game that probably, and like by association, it's also Gaiden, because it's basically the same maps, but, you know, Shadows of Valentia and Gaiden are really, really terrible in terms of the map design, and they're known for this. I mean, the Cantor is just continuously summoning units over and over and over again, or they're the ones who got summoned. I can't even remember, but it was just such a slog to play through a lot of times. I enjoyed it very much when I played it the first time, but I think in terms of map design, this one takes the cake for sure. Now, the worst one in terms of difficulty, this one's a no-brainer. Sacred Stones is the easiest game in the series. Now, there is something to be said, and I did read this in the comments before in one of my other videos. I can't remember who mentioned it specifically. It's probably mentioned a couple times, but Fire Emblem Awakening has a real difficulty problem. So this one honestly might compete with Sacred Stones here for difficulty. The only reason Sacred Stones gets a bad rap for difficulty is because its hard mode is pretty on par with normal mode from pretty much every other game, and it doesn't really have a difficult mode. And then you also have like the infinite overworld grind with Tower of Valny. Now, that comes back in a lot of other games, so I don't want to knock it for that, but at least in a game like Engage or a game like Three Houses, the maddening level is difficult. Hard mode in Sacred Stones is not difficult. The reason Awakening is up here is because Lunatic is just insane, or Lunatic Plus, or I forget what the hardest difficulty. I think it's Lunatic. It's just so terribly balanced. And then the mode right underneath it, I think it was Hard, is easier than you would expect it to be. So I might have to come back to this one and see if I don't have something else to put here. Hub World. Honestly, Hub World might be a great spot for Three Houses. Of the 3 hub worlds that I have allowed myself to put in here, remember, I've limited myself to putting Three Houses, Fates, and Engage here. I think Three Houses' Monastery Fatigue is the most intrusive of all 3 of them. I don't really think Three Houses is the worst in any of these other categories. I mean, it might compete for map design, but it's really hard to edge out Echoes. I think actually worst hub world can be Three Houses here for sure. And I'm only putting it here because I have Engage in the supports. Like, the Somniel is... Okay, so there's a debate to be had between Three Houses and Fire Emblem Engage. If I really wanted to take this seriously and kind of break it down, the Somniel is not as deep as Three Houses in terms of its system in its hub world. Having said that, Engage has the little edge of having multiple different hubs after the maps where you can interact with your characters, and Three Houses doesn't do that. It's always back to the monastery. So here you do get a little bit of a break in between maps to roam around the map that you just played in afterwards, which is kind of nice. In addition to that, I feel like the Somniel is a little bit more optimized than the monastery. The monastery is massive, which again, don't get me wrong, from like a world building perspective and like just the grandiosity of it, it's really cool when you see it the first couple times, but running around over and over and over again, I know there's fast travel, but then you have to load things. It burns you out. The fatigue burns you out here. So I am conflicted. Fates, by far, in a way, has the better hub world of the 3, for sure, if I had to choose. But I think in the interest of keeping Engage in the supports tier, I will leave Three Houses in the hub world tier here. I think the monastery fatigue is real. It causes a lot of burnout. I think it's fair to put it, of those 3, just those 3, probably the worst hub world. Now, music is really, really, really hard because I think Fire Emblem at its baseline has pretty phenomenal music. And this might also be an unpopular opinion, but I actually really like the way the themes sound in old school Fire Emblem. So this is going to be a little bit of like an exclusion one for me because I find it very hard to say that any Fire Emblem game has bad music. I actually love the music in all of the games. But if I'm going to think about the least memorable music, there might be something to said about Sword of Seals where all of the maps have the same map theme. And maybe we'd knock this down to the music tier instead of the progression tier, and I put FE7 up in progression. But I love FE7 so much, so I'm biased, but the progression is really very basic. It is what you see is what you get, and that's it. Every unit has their identity, they promote, and that's it. Like, there's nothing extra to it. It's as bare bones as it gets. It's on the same level as FE1. It just doesn't have any other progression systems aside from the promotion, which I guess also bleeds into the class system. Okay, let's close out the music here. I'm going to keep Sword of Seals in the music because the map themes are all very similar for very long periods of time. Now, when we talk about the class system, there's really, really slim pickings here when it comes to it. And I feel like this one is another one that's kind of unfair because what's left is the traditional Fire Emblem class system. Like, they only started to develop, and I guess this is a little bit of a flaw with doing something like this, is the class system only really evolved in Sacred Stones. Before that, it was a basic class system where you level up, you promote, and that's all you have access to. And so putting any of these into the class system is honestly pretty identical to how it was. But I think with Genealogy and Thracia, you have skills, and they added Kanto. With Path of Radiance, I mean, Radiant Dawn has the third tier of classes, so I think that excludes it. And New Mystery of the Emblem has reclassing, so I think that excludes that. I might just have to go with like the original FE1 for the class system. I mean, it's at its most basic, so it's by default the worst. Now, when it comes to animations, I've been very vocal. Oh, I should bring this back here. I think we'll keep Sacred Stones in the difficulty category. I think that's what we'll do. I don't know. I'll go back and revise. I'll double check it later. When it comes to the worst animations, I've been very vocal, and I say Shadow Dragon has terrible animations, but I have it in the characters tier. And so the next best is New Mystery of the Emblem, because those animations are an abomination. It's like the little 2.5D. They are ugly. And I know you can go back to like the original NES games and say those animations also looked ugly, and I think that's fair, but there's an element to them, at least in my opinion, that's a little bit more charming than what Shadow Dragon did, or and New Mystery of the Emblem did. I really, really hate those animations. They depersonalized them. They made them look so generic that it just makes things painful. So I'm gonna keep this in the animations category. Now, one game that I will say could give it a run for its money, actually, is Path of Radiance. Because unlike Radiant Dawn kind of did some fun things with the animations, and it made the characters pretty badass when they did their like crit animations where they knock over characters, or some of the skills were pretty nice with the animations. Path of Radiance animations are just so slow and so repetitive that you could argue they go in here. But just by a pure looks perspective, I'm gonna keep New Mystery of the Emblem here. All right, so art. I think that Fire Emblem has pretty good art in general, and I think a lot of people might say that Engage could go down here in the art area because the characters are kind of controversial, but I disagree. I think Engage's art is very like vibrant and colorful. When I talk about art, I also talk about like the way the maps look, the way the themes look, the background looks, the general sort of aesthetics of the game. And from that perspective, I might just have to go old again with something like an FE3. It's just dated, it looks old, but I really like the SNES look, and I really like the way the Tellius art looks. And I think anything into the 3DS era and onwards looks actually pretty sharp. And so I'm just gonna have to go with old Fire Emblem here. I know I've ragged a lot on the old games. They didn't really see anything in the best tier, and they saw a couple things in the worst tier, so I feel kind of guilty, but I think this looks fairly okay. It's interesting that these 5 games have nothing that's the worst. I think some people would argue that FE4 has terrible map design, but I don't think it's worse than Echoes. Thracia, I think, is just solid all around. I don't think it's the worst in anything. I don't think it's really the best in anything, but I think it's a good, solid Fire Emblem game overall. Path of Radiance, again, like I said, could be argued for in the animations section. The music, honestly, in Path of Radiance could also be put up there, but some of the individual themes are bangers. Like, you'll never forget Lion King Kanagus's theme. You'll never forget the Black Knight theme. You'll never forget Together We Ride. Not Together We Ride. What's the recruitment theme called in Path of Radiance? I'm blanking on the name, but I know what it is. Like, I could sing it to you if I really wanted to, but I won't do that because I'm a terrible singer. And some of those carry forward into Radiant Dawn, and I actually really like Radiant Dawn's music in general, so I don't think it's the worst in any of these things. So just to go over these, yeah, I think keeping Fates in story is probably fair. There is an argument to be made that there's other games that could be up here next to it, but I think I like where it's at here because I wouldn't put it anywhere else. In terms of characters, yeah, I'll stand by Shadow Dragon any day, any day. Those characters just suck. They're literal cardboard cutouts. You could substitute them for generics and you wouldn't get anything new. The progression system, I think I've discussed. This is a flawed category. It's unfair to put this up here as a worst because the progression system is only improved with time in Fire Emblem, and it's the same with the class system. It's only improved with time with Fire Emblem. So I think these 2 categories are just you're just talking about time and being outdated and old, which isn't inherently bad. Again, it's like the worst of the greats. Supports, I'm going to put Engage up here. I just feel like all of the characters were one-dimensional in Engage in the supports. There might be some exceptions to the rule, but I really was not very happy with the support quality in Engage. Map design, we talked about this at length. Difficulty, we did our Sacred Stones versus Awakening debate. I honestly still think you could go either way. I don't think there would be a wrong choice here, but I'm going to stick with Sacred Stones because I do wish that game was a little bit harder. Hub World, 3 Houses, we talked about that at length. Music, yeah, I'm just going to give it to Binding Blade. Class system, we talked about. Animations, we talked about. Art, we talked about. So yeah, I think if I was to design the worst Fire Emblem game, it would be Fates' story, Shadow Dragon's characters, GBA Fire Emblem's progression, Engage's supports, Shadows of Valentia's map design, with Sacred Stones' difficulty, 3 Houses' hub world, Binding Blade's music, the class system of the NES games, the animations of the DS remakes of the NES games, and the original game's art. This would look like a terrible game. Now that I'm looking at, I think about this and I was giggling a little bit as I was talking about it. Yeah, this would be an atrocity of a game, I'll tell you that. I think I did a good job here, but yeah, let me know what your guys' lists look like in the comments below. And yeah, happy Tuesday. This was just a fun little Tuesday video, and I will see you guys all on Friday. It's probably going to be 16 weeks of me uploading pretty consistently come this Friday, so I'm pretty proud of that. Yeah, leave me a like, subscribe if you guys like the consistent videos, and I will see you all in another one very soon. Peace.